Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by FlexiCharge, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
And welcome to a new episode of the ChargePoint podcast. I'm Christophe and I'm from FlexiCharge. What if the biggest roadblock to EV adoption and electrification of transportation isn't the vehicle or even the charger, but the grid? In this episode of the ChargePoint podcast, I'm joined by Julia Hildermeier from the Regulatory Assistance Project, or RAP, to unpack why grid integration is fast becoming the central challenge for the electrification of transport in Europe. We talk about why power grid constraints are stalling depot charging for trucks and large-scale public charging infrastructure, how connection delays, opaque planning processes, and outdated pricing models are hitting CPOs where it hurts, financial viability, and why it's critical to shift from capacity-based pricing to volumetric models to help CPOs and fleet operators scale profitably. Julia also brings us concrete examples of local best practices, including how some municipalities and regulators are cutting red tape and prioritizing grid access for mature, shovel-ready projects. Plus, we explore RAP's latest guide outlining the policy building blocks needed to streamline both planning and pricing across Europe. And of course, what would a RAP interview be without some smart copywriting talk? Yes, we touch on those signature RAP paper titles too. If you're a CPO looking to expand, a policymaker pushing for reform, or just curious about how we make grids and mobility place nicely together, this episode is packed with clarity, insights, and actionable thinking. Let's get into it. It's Julia Hildermeier from RAP. Welcome, Julia.
Sure, and thanks so much for having me. It's glad to be here. So my name is Julia Hildermeier. I lead the electrification of transport work in RAP's Europe team. And what we mostly do really is work on all things related to EVs and the power grids, with smart charging right at the center. I myself have a background in sustainable transport policy, did my PhD in a global automotive research group at university in Paris and in Berlin. And then I went to Brussels to work on EU policy. More precisely, I joined the largest transport advocacy group, Transport Environment, before joining RAP 6 years ago.
All right. And how did you find RAP? How did you meet them? How did you hear about them? How did it happen?
That's a fun story, and it's a true story, I'm going to tell you.
All right.
I came across RAP's newsletter, which is actually quite informative, and you get access to all these new papers and contents. And they published this paper called Treasure Hiding in Plain Sight. I always loved their titles. And it showed evidence that European grids, power grids, are much underutilized, and that moving electric vehicles, charging to the right time, could save money for consumers, the grid, and the environment by sort of bringing in renewables and using that capacity better. And I love that. And I thought, if that's true, why aren't there more people talking about this in the policy space? Why aren't we seeing this treasure that's hiding in plain sight? So that's how I caught the energy bug and joined RAP shortly after.
Good copywriting. Again, here, I can only agree. And I think I heard there's a kind of a bit of a competition on fancy or catchy titles, right? Among you guys at RAP. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's what we love doing. We love doing good titles for our papers, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, substance matters, but in the end, you also got to catch attention in this attention economy we live in today, right? All right, so let's get to the matter. So again, can you maybe refresh us on what RAP does? What's the mission of this organization, and what kind of organization are you?
Yes, sure. So RAP, think of us really as a global group of experts, policy experts, working on energy transition topics. We're working on reducing carbon emissions across a variety of sectors, such as power, energy, buildings and heat, and transport. Of course, in transport, the emissions are still growing. It's roughly a third of CO2 emissions in Europe, and with these, road transport being the largest share, right? And we focus on electrification on transport because of energy efficiency. We really see that direct electrification of road transport is obviously the most energy efficient option to decarbonize transport. And additionally, capturing all those benefits that electrification brings, like connecting to power grids already there, absorbing clean energy into the grid, and helping developing the power grid where needed. And today, for electrification of transport in most countries, grid integration is really becoming the largest bottleneck.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're going to talk a lot about today. Yeah. So in many ways, EV charging is no longer just a car challenge, right? It's becoming a grid challenge, as we just said. And for trucks, a logistics one too. So what are the top barriers you see for scaling e-trucks charging today, both en route and in depots?
So for transport electrification, there are two main problems, and I would say both are linked. The first one is power grids or power grid infrastructure. They're today the main bottleneck for scaling electrification of road transport. For example, depot owners or fleet owners face long connection queues when they want to upgrade their depot, start to charge more electric trucks. They're facing long connection queues before they're able to do so, to get the right capacity installed, to be able to charge their fleets. And the same happens for charge point operators. If you want to build a truck charging hub, you need to upgrade to provide enough capacity for charging. And the problem is that often to apply for upscaling capacity at such a site is a lengthy process. It's taking time, and then building that capacity once the grid operator has accepted your request, again, takes lots of time. And that doesn't match with, the business needs, the timing of the operators, of the depot operators, but also the charging point operators. And the second problem is the pricing of using the power networks. Because in our studies, we looked at sort of the cost of charging in trucks at Europe's busiest highways. And we saw that the cost for using the power networks will be probably the most important cost factor for CPOs, for charge point operators. And that is due to the way that these costs are designed. But there's ways to reform these to help CPOs improve their business case. So it's both planning and pricing, the two main problems for scaling electric road transport today.
Right. And I think this has been recapped in a recent 2-pager report, or how do you describe it, which I saw recently. Can you just say a few words about this 2-pager?
Yes, sure. It's good timing that we talk today. We just published this short guide. You could call it an infographic, an extended infographic, or a short guide, where we really summarize our the main building blocks that we see need to be in place in Europe to solve that problem. The first one is being pricing of power networks. If it's based only on capacity that is provided and not on the volume of electricity that is actually sold to the electric trucks. And otherwise, if we don't get away from capacity-based pricing towards more volumetric pricing, we're not going to help the business for charge point operators. We're also not going to help the depot owners to electrify cost efficiently. And the other bit to it is planning, right? We need to accelerate planning. We need to streamline permitting. We need to help more mature applications to be considered quickly. So the build out of truck charging infrastructure, but also the electrification of road transport in general, is not driven by administrative hurdles, but rather by the demand of the market. And then we really sort of zoom into those use cases of depot charging and highway charging. Depot charging is really the no-hanging fruit in the sector today, right? And we haven't seen enough policy action on European level, but also on member state level, to really help fleet owners or depot owners to electrify faster.
Before we continue with the show, deploying charging stations in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland? Our optimized masterclass, Compliance First, shows you how to master local grid regulations and stay ahead. Discover how our grid control service helps CPO cut through complexity and connect faster in the DACH region. Watch now the on-demand webinar on our website. And now back to the show. Can you maybe go a little deeper, a bit more details on what you call policy solutions to address the challenge of scaling the electrification of heavy-duty transport?
Absolutely. So in one word, it's really about smart charging. Those electric trucks are a grid challenge, you said that, but they're also very much a grid solution. And that's because of all the flexibility that they offer as large batteries on wheels, if you want, as demand-side flexibility resources, as we call it. And we need to unlock that potential with smart charging. And I said earlier, smart charging is savings for the consumers, for the grid, and for the environment, right? So what's actually in it? It's hard to quantify, but we did it.
Nice.
At least we made an attempt. We looked into, a couple of years ago already, we looked into electric truck fleets parked at a depot, and we estimated the benefits they have from moving the charging into hours where charging is cheaper. And we found that a 10 electric truck fleet can already help a depot to achieve considerable savings, up to 15,000 euros annually, or about 10 to 15% of the total energy costs, including charging. And that's really just by designing optimal charging scenarios based on their estimates of the combined cost for charging and grid use. And that's based on a real use case informed by fleet businesses in a depot in Germany. So that was pre-energy crisis prices. So, you would have to do that analysis again, but it gives us an idea that just by optimizing on-site based on charging prices, depots or fleet owners can already make savings. Obviously, what you need in place is the price signal. So if there's flat energy prices, you're not going to have any incentive to charge, right? So the very crucial, essential condition to make smart charging work, to unlock savings from smart charging, is cost-effective pricing. If I can add one, in a more recent study, we looked at a typical European grid. It's modeled on a grid area south of Paris in Essonne. And we looked at how much a fleet of passenger cars, but also trucks, can save by optimizing charging. It's the projected EV fleet that we expect in that area in 2040 based on today's traffic data. And we found that based on smart charging, there can be 25% of savings on grid investments per year. So this time we took the perspective of the grid cost. We asked, what can we save? What can smart charging save for the grids? And grid operators can save 25% of their grid investment cost per year. That's very interesting saving. So in sum, smart charging is not some geek feature for electric vehicles. It's absolutely essential to help consumers save money, but also help the grid save money and accelerate the clean transition, of course.
All right. Very clear, yeah. We'll make sure we'll get some links in the show notes to all that you're mentioning, everything that you want to share. Well, I'm sure the listeners will be happy to take a look at. All right. Can you please share, we discussed in our preparation call some very interesting concrete practices. So can you share some of those concrete promising practices by EU member states, example, tenders and so on, please?
Yes, sure. So first of all, what we need is more transparency on what's happening on the power grids today. So we need updated, accessible hosting capacity maps of the distribution grids in Europe today. So anyone who wants to basically tap into the capacity on these grids, build charging infrastructure, provide a flexibility service, do some planning, has access to this data. And that's a massive gap. And this is where policy makers on European but also national level need to step up with stricter transparency requirements on grid operators. There are a couple of examples where energy regulators have already asked for this, and grid operators have produced such maps, and we're seeing more and more of these, and that's very helpful. An early example is UK power networks, who have made available such a map where you could really see hosting capacity, sort of click on a certain location and just learn what's available on the grid to use, basically. So that was an early inspirational pilot for other countries to follow.
Impressive.
Another really promising practice for us are public tenders. I said earlier that planning is one of the challenges for electrification of road transport. So how do we go about planning? Do we just sort of leave it to the market and let everyone build charging infrastructure where they can? Obviously, charging infrastructure needs to be based on where the vehicles actually need to charge. It also should be based on where the grid capacity is, so we use it best before scaling it up where needed, right? So we really need to match the grid capacity with the charging demand. And a very good instrument to do so is public tenders, because authorities have a very clear idea of a certain territory. They have the planning tools. They can, make sure that these both of these maps are being produced and matched. For building out electric truck charging infrastructure, the best example that comes to mind is a tender from Germany, where the planning agency basically did that, looked at the charging needs, looked at the grid infrastructure, and then basically provided a map of charging locations that should be built for truck. They also added in a very interesting feature, a very ambitious feature, if you can call it that. It is a sort of bring your own electricity contract feature, which would allow fleets to bring their own electricity contract with them to the location at which they would charge. It's called the so-called Durchleitungsmodell. It will be interesting to see how this plays out in practice. What we like about this, of course, is that it brings some healthy competition into the market, because, of course, fleets, freight is a very competitive business with low margins, and fleets will have to watch their charging costs very closely. So I'm very interested to see how this charging infrastructure will build out, hopefully very soon.
So that's quite unique, yeah. The idea that I think I'd heard about it earlier from a German consultant, yeah. So that you can really bring your tariffs wherever you're charging. That's really progressive and really interesting. Okay, good. Let's move on to the recommendation part. So after those concrete promising practices, I'd like to hear a bit about your recommendation, because this is your job, right, to do recommendations. So let's really hear it. What kind of concrete recommendations do you have for logistics managers or fleet depot operators? How do we make it easier for them? Tell me.
Yes, I mean, for depot owners or fleet operators, it's really all about optimizing based on hopefully very cost-reflective tariffs that you're going to see for your energy, right? So it all starts by studying optimization potential on site, depending on what activity we're looking at, whether it's refrigeration, whether it's logistics, whether it's sorting parcels. There is a certain activity on site, and there will be an electric fleet of trucks that adds consumption to this. So that's an envelope that you can work with. So first of all, it's about looking at the flexibility windows that the fleet trucks have, between the shifts. Can they be charging during the parking time? Can they be charging during the onloading and offloading times? Where are the windows? And then it's about matching these against pricing. And that's something, of course, that fleets can try to achieve in the contracts they negotiate, but it also will depend a lot on the grid area in which their depot is located, which is why our recommendations go beyond fleets, also to the energy regulators, to the grid operators that are designing those prices for the power networks. Again, the more cost-reflective they are, the better the price signal is to fleets to optimize, and the more savings the fleet owners can make. So our recommendations to fleet owners: optimize. Our recommendations to the grid side: put cost-reflective pricing in place. preferably time of use or time varying network pricing. Our recommendations to public authorities and policymakers at all levels is get those tenders out, help build the charging infrastructure along highways, and very importantly, help depot owners to electrify sooner than later, because that's where the journey of a truck starts. That's where they will start charging. And we haven't seen enough support tools. This could be, one-stop shop type of solutions, smartly designed purchase incentives for electric trucks, plus fitting the charging infrastructure, plus a smart tariff. So the fleet has sort of, package they need to electrify from day one. That's the kind of solution that we'd love to see, and that would help scale electrification of freight.
If you look on the European level, do you see some countries or regions being ahead of the pack, having even more promising results? You mentioned German example, but is Germany ahead on electrification of heavy duty, or do you see other regions or countries?
I would say on a European scale, I would say that the Netherlands are pretty advanced in terms of supporting fleet electrification, because they have, had policies in place to support electrification of logistics early on already. They also have the biggest grid bottlenecks that they need to face at the moment. So they also have an incentive to support load management on site, but also smart charging more generally. So I think it's a double incentive from the transport side to scale electrification of fleets, but also from the energy side to help use grid capacity best.
No, but when you say that, no matter, it's not about local initiative, because in the end we need to have a European solution, because trucks are they're moving things across Europe, right? It's, of course, you have national transports, but in the end we all have to move at the same pace, or at least follow, so trucks can go from Copenhagen or Stockholm to Valencia, right, and be able to charge all across those corridors in Europe. So how do you see that aligning the countries, the tempo, the pace, and so on?
Thank you for bringing the corridor keyword into the conversation. So indeed, what needs to happen next is electrify those highway corridors. We have a pretty good idea of where the electric trucks will charge on their journeys across Europe. And of course, we have the AFIR, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, that sets targets for member states to scale that truck charging infrastructure along highways, both in terms of capacity, but also in terms of distance of charging hubs. So that's really great. And the intention of this regulation is really to set the sort of essential minimum backbone type of network that we need to electrify European freight. The timelines, by the way, are way more ambitious than what the grid planning side can currently deliver. So already, just looking at the policies of the regulation, we're seeing, some big pressure here on grids. Hence, our recommendations on planning and pricing. We're currently also seeing an initiative to start with the two key corridors, north, south, east, west, and that's all really very helpful to push electrification of freight. What we need to be cautious about is that this really remains a European effort. We looked into the pricing of charging those trucks, as I mentioned earlier, in a paper that looked specifically at border locations. So what would happen if we scale, up to megawatt charging along those key freight corridors, and trucks would charge as they do today when fueling, just next to borders, right? Fleets usually have a certain margin on where they decide to stop, do the minimum resting break of 45 minutes, and fuel or charge. And we looked at the prices of this charging, and what we're likely to see is that there could be some price distortion, because, as I said earlier, the biggest cost driver for charging is the use of power networks. So what happens if the pricing of power networks is very different at the two sides of the border? It will likely lead to cheaper charging at one side and more expensive charging at the other side. So what could happen then is that trucks all choose to charge at the cheaper side of the border, which will stress the power grids there that are likely to be in less well state because that makes them cheaper. But it also creates costs on the more expensive side of the border. Why? Because we're underusing capacity. So in both cases, the grid isn't well used, it's not optimally used, because the pricing doesn't steer the truck charging in the optimal way. And that creates costs that everyone has to carry. Remember, electricity networks are a socialized system. It's not just the fleets and the truck the fleet owners that are going to pay for it. It's literally everyone who pays an electricity bill. It's every one of us. This is why we talk about rightly sized investments into power networks. Yes, we will definitely have to scale capacity for truck charging, but we also need to make sure that we scale it to the right size and we put the pricing in place to use those power networks optimally. I can give you a couple of examples. We looked into the border between Poland and Germany, and charging in Poland was a lot cheaper than charging in Germany for an electric truck. I think it was about 15 euros per kilowatt. So that's a big price difference that will make a difference for a fleet of a couple of trucks and daily border crossings. We saw price difference between Netherlands and Germany, between Austria and Italy. So it's really showing that network pricing needs to be more cost reflective in all member states. So we're likely getting to more, let's say, not levelized, but pricing that would help set the right price for charging along these corridors.
Yeah, so kind of well thought through, not random or not competing, but just really well coordinated.
Optimal pricing.
And optimal pricing, reflecting the situation and the conditions of the different markets. Yeah, sounds like a lot of good coordination in Brussels to happen still here. But so strategic, very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those examples. Right, so I think that's it for now. We could have a lot of knowledge to share, but I think people should also just get it from also your report. So if we mention a few resources that people could grab on your website, so I would mention the Accelerating the Shift, so how to advance electric truck charging in Europe, which you just mentioned, which was just published today at the recording of this episode here in late June. Any other recommendations for readings on your website that you can share for now? Anything you wanted to share?
We have a paper on savings on power grids from smart charging in Europe, based on the case study in France that I mentioned. But it's really a very sort of typical grid for Europe. We did that similar type of study for other regions in the world, the biggest electric vehicle markets actually. So we have another one for Colorado, for a highway corridor in India, and for a province in China. And we also have a global lessons paper on this that I'm happy to share. We also have some earlier studies on optimizing depot charging. And if it's interesting, a TCO of electric fleets at depots in 5 different European cities that we've done together with the ICCT. That is another interesting one, perhaps for your audience. Also happy to share that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I haven't read this one yet. I'm definitely going to grab it and study and share with the team, as we work on this topic. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for taking the time. We'll share all the links in the show notes. And I wish you a great afternoon and great weekend.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Pleasure.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on this episode of the ChargePoint podcast. Huge thanks again to Julia from the Regulatory Assistance Project for joining me and sharing such sharp, grounded insights into the challenges and solutions at the intersection of EV charging and grid infrastructure. So what did we learn? First, the power grid is no longer just a backdrop. It's becoming the main stage when it comes to scaling electric mobility. Whether you are a CPO trying to launch a new truck charging hub or a fleet operator electrifying depots, you're likely running into one big bottleneck: grid capacity. Julia helped us understand that it's not just about building more grid, it's about using what we already have more intelligently. It's about using what we already have more intelligently. That means rethinking how we allocate and price grid capacity, especially moving away from outdated capacity-based fees towards more volumetric pricing that aligns better with CPO business models. We also touch on some best practices from around Europe, like municipalities that are fast-tracking permitting and grid connection for mature projects. And we heard how smart planning frameworks and proactive coordination between the DNOs, regulators, and operators can significantly reduce connection delays and unlock faster growth. Another big point that stuck: depot charging for trucks is the low-hanging fruit. But even there, success depends on aligning infrastructure timelines with vehicle procurement and business operations, something that's far from guaranteed today. And finally, Julia reminded us that grid planning doesn't have to be boring. It can be smart, flexible, and yes, well, even sexy with the right copywriting. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, give it a 5-star rating, leave a review, or share this episode with someone in your network who's working at the front lines of the energy and mobility transition. Until next time, keep charging smart. I'm Christophe from FlexiCharge, and this was the ChargePoint Podcast.